Previously on midlifing, I have the water so hot that I'm basically I use it as a contraceptive device. I'm just cooking my genitals to the point that they couldn't possibly produce anything that could make a human.
You do put your whole body in the bath. I guess when you're talking about artisanal bread,
you know that's you know that's not how it's said, because art is anal, but still. My question today, I thought I wanted to talk about pleasure.
Oh.
This is a podcast in which two friends have serious conversations about silly things and silly conversations about serious things.
I'm Simon Ellis.
And I'm Lee Miller.
Welcome to midlifing. Oh, fantastic. Oh, and there's no question that precisely that thing you've just described, in which, and it's not about the not following the things in a recipe. It's not that, because I can use that as a skeleton, or I can follow a recipe very directly. It's not about not having to do that. It's more that the pleasure of recognizing all the things that are going on and the way in which they pass into being capable of doing something. And particularly in this case, because it's with my hands.
Yeah.
And it just brings me so much pleasure. In a way that, I spend a lot of time on computers and in lots of different contexts, but in a way that's very different from the pleasure of, say, cutting a film or editing video materials.
Mm. Where does pleasure sit for you?
Oh, it's just, I don't even know how to describe that. It's the pleasure of making something, that's for sure. Mm-hmm. That's something that was just flour, water, and salt.
Yeah.
In this particular instance, but generally the pleasure of making something. This didn't exist, and now it exists. And also the pleasure of doing that in a way that is a sort of minimal tax on the world, and also that it's taken me time to be able to do that. It's not something I could do immediately. Plenty of failures along the way. And so there's something about that combination. And also, the taste, right? The actual thing itself. Mm-hmm. It's like the pleasure of understanding something. With my hands and with my senses, and I don't know how would you ask that? How would you respond to that question?
Oh, I wouldn't even begin to know how to unpack it. I think the just listening to you think through pleasure in relationship to one very specific task has just been really illuminating, because I don't know how to answer that question, because I suppose I wasn't thinking down this route when I was thinking that we might talk about pleasure. I think the reason it came up was in the last time we chatted, you talked about your memory of school being mostly one of pleasure.
Yes.
And I remember hearing you say that word and sort of it catching on my ear in a particular way and thinking, pleasure. That's a really interesting word to evoke your schoolhood days, because pleasure tends to be connected to something sensorial.
Yes.
And then at the same time, of course, you were in your body during your school days. Why wouldn't that be a
my
pleasurable
senses
experience?
were still functioning. Or
yeah, exactly that. But it's
just getting
that,
revved up, in fact.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about what the role pleasure has in our lives, and also to what degree has pleasure been actively I'm not sure if I want to say sidelined or reduced, or I don't know what the word is, but it's just that sense that pleasure is something. Okay, so in the 1974 film The Rocky Horror Picture Show,
yes,
towards the end, you've got Frankenfurter who sings "Give yourself over to absolute pleasure," and then swim the warm waters of sins of the flesh. And there's that very strong correlation between absolute pleasure and physical abandon and the use of the word sin is in there.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like the idea that pleasure is somehow self-serving.
Yes.
Pleasure-seeking.
Yes.
It's somehow...
hedonism.
Exactly, yeah. And I just found myself reflecting upon your use of the word pleasure to connect to your school days and thinking, well, that's not hedonistic.
It's really is quite... it's such a joy to think about it in a way, because actually, if I think about it now, the nature of these conversations is profoundly pleasurable for me. And you can hear that because we're laughing, or I'm laughing a lot. And it reminds me of the way in which conversations as a teenager, so I guess it's not surprising that
We laugh at bumholes.
that we have a pretty low bar, a low threshold for humour. Sorry, dear listeners, that perhaps yours is lower than ours. Let us know. Write us at info@midlifing.net.
Let's be honest. If people are still listening to us at this point, they've gotten used to the fact that we laugh at crap things.
But it's something about the pleasure of sparking and being sparked that I'm finding out, I'm being found out, of recalling things. And yes, this is through conversation in a way that it might have been, at school, or clearly these kinds of conversations going on, but also, just physically larking about.
Yeah.
And so this, and for me, it is a sensorial. The sensorial thing which you've just described is a really important thing. That it's like a kind of vibing of the senses.
Yeah.
And that might be in conversation. It might be with a loaf of bread. It might be, But there's something about it sounds a bit academic, but kind of being with something or someone. And to me, that's there's nothing. I mean, sure, sex is super pleasurable, right? It's not like, if those are the first things that come to mind, that's great, right? No problem. No kink shaming here, right?
No, of course not.
But then, well, what else is there? I think there's something profound when we are with others making things, and you and I are doing this now, right? It's
absolutely.
As small and as insignificant as it might be. And this, to me, that is profoundly pleasurable. It's so much more than anything that are the kind of the regular demands of generating an income, or just so much more.
Well, I remember reading an article that said something along the lines of, don't make a decision that makes you happy, make a decision that will challenge you. And for about a week, I thought, "Ooh, that feels like ever such good advice." And the longer I sat with it, the more I just thought, "That's dreadful! What awful advice!" Because it's that mindset of pleasure being somehow wicked or sinful or pointless, and surely, as long as it's having no impact on other people, your happiness should be something that you pursue. I find the idea of abstemiousness for the sake of it, or the idea of privation for the sake of it, really difficult.
Oh, it's really... I find myself really agreeing, like I really do, and yet there's also part of me which goes, it touches on that the last part of one of a recent episode about community, which is what is the cost of my happiness, or what are the costs of my happiness? And I guess that's you're hinting at that when you say that, as long as it does no harm to others, or I might add, to the planet. What resources are needed in order for you, or for us, or for one to pursue pleasure.
But if we're talking about pleasure being derived from being with, if we're talking about pleasure being derived from the production of something that gives us joy,
and I think to me that's the distinction, or that it might be a useful distinction. Where does pleasure sit with me? To go back to your initial question, and I'm not suggesting that this should be of others, but that there's something about recognizing my role in something, and with someone, or as I say, something, and that there's a kind of it's anything but passive or consumptive. It's I'm actively in this thing, and it's buzzing with possibility, and like to me that's I'm right there, and that can happen in the most curious of circumstances. You know, in a teaching situation, it can happen in all sorts of quite surprising places, I guess. But
I think I'm really taken by this idea of being with, and it does, in many respects, pick up on some of the things that we kind of left almost unfinished when we had the conversation about community. I enjoy watching telly. Yeah, I find it quite diverting, but really when I get pleasure from it, it's because I'm engaged in it with somebody else, and it's what comes out of the process of talking about it. So Bob and I, our Saturday morning ritual is for me to get up and make something for breakfast. This morning it was scones.
You just for all our listeners, if you ever get the opportunity to have some of Lee's scones, he is a far more than competent scone maker. He is I would say, a master scone maker.
Well, I'm flattered by that.
They're worth every
suggestion.
crumb.
Oh, wow. I've been using a new recipe that allows me to press my sourdough discard into service.
Oh,
which is
so
a
they're
lot
sourdough based.
They're sourdough-based scones. Yeah, so I make depending on what's in the fridge, sometimes I can use half sourdough, half double cream, half sourdough, half yogurt, half sourdough, half
So you've
milk.
been press ganging your sourdough discards.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of that.
I can't. The idea of tipping it down the sink just makes me...
I did it for years.
Feels,
so wasteful.
Yeah,
So
it
wasteful.
is, isn't it?
How
It
much
is.
flour and water I've thrown out.
Yeah, because you get to a point where you can only give it to so many people before they start going, can you stop? Can you stop trying to make me make... I'm never going to make sourdough. So effectively all I'm doing is outsourcing my disposal.
Which is, as we all know from Marie Kondo, it's not something you should do. You don't give your stuff
it's
away.
Not. No, you should make scones with the things that you find lying around. This book isn't working for me. Liquidize
scone,
it.
add
Make
butter.
a scone. Exactly. So I'll make breakfast and take the breakfast goods up to Bob. And we then, while we eat our whatever breakfast goods we happen to be eating in bed, we will then watch the most recent episode of RuPaul's Drag Race.
Saturday mornings.
Exactly.
And then you go and dangle.
then I go and jump in the bath. But the pleasure is very rarely from watching the show. It's from pausing the show and saying, oh, well, I just fundamentally disagree with that decision. What were they thinking? So today, Bob and I were in high dudgeon about the person who was eliminated because I believe we both were yelling quite loudly at one another that it was objectively clear. As if in a competition anything can be objectively clear, but still that's the language we used. No. It was objectively clear that Denali was better in that lip sync than Olivia Lux. How
yes,
dare
Jana was skilled and Olivia was just competent.
Exactly that. Exactly. So the joy, the pleasure comes from being in the moment with Bob, not from watching these two people sing.
Hey, so
pretend to sing.
When I said being with, what did you think I meant? Just out of curiosity. I don't think I was being opaque, but I just want to be sure we're talking about the same thing because I think we are. But
yeah, no, I think I understood you to mean that you were in. I don't want to say in dialogue with because that's not quite right, but that you're in a process with I can't. I sort of almost can't unpick it because being with just feels so eloquent.
But because like if it's bread, right? It's like I'm not in a dialogue with it.
No, because obviously it's not linguistic. But
that would be great, wouldn't it? Right, meet me here.
But it's relational.
Yeah,
isn't it? I mean, well, okay. I'm going to pause. If we were to believe like sort of the writings of somebody like Donna Haraway, absolutely. It's relational because we're embracing the idea of the thingness of the object that you're working with and that it has agency beyond what you impart to it, but it has agency of its own.
Yeah, non-human agency.
Yeah, and I think I'm kind of there.
Yeah, right.
I think I spend enough time with a dog
Oh, yeah.
to think that, if I'm only going to be thinking about human agency, I'm I'm ignoring probably 75% of my exchange with the world, which is done through.
Yeah. Although, it's a fetch, though, isn't it, to say that my bread has agency. And yet, it's changing.
I think it's not. I don't think it's a stretch to say that your bread has agency. I think the stretch is if we are only seeing the world from the anthropocentric.
Sure.
And if we're only going to give, and this is, I'm going to sound a little teacherly. By occupying an exclusively anthropocentric worldview, that's why we end up with plastics in the ocean and not giving a shit about anything else, because we assume that we have primacy over everything else, as opposed to thinking, well, we're just a moment, and this big old ball of rock won't have us forever. Thank fuck for the ball of rock, hey?
Yep, we are a blip, that's for sure.
Oh, for sure.
And that's the thing. Yeah, there's the discrepancy between our blippiness and the idea that we're not, that we live our lives as if we're not.
Absolutely. And I find, as much as I think that, as much as I listen to Greta Thunberg and think, wow, that is a clarity and a certainty and a purpose that I am so envious of, I also find myself going, just let us all just fuck everything up until we just burn. It's all right. Something else will come along. But that is a kind of hedonistic. Potentially, isn't it a hedonistic? I think it could be seen as
just do whatever I want. There's no.
Well, I don't think that I'm saying do whatever I want. You see, this is where I get caught in my own.
I don't think that's what you were saying, but I'm just saying it could be
read
that way.
Yeah, exactly. For sure. I think what I mean is, as much as I think it's awful that that as custodians of the planet we've done such a piss poor job of it, I also think that the hubris that the world somehow needs us is tricky as well.
Yeah.
But that it will continue, and I think there's this sense that it will be less rich than because of our because we'll disappear, and then the world will be less rich. It's kind of like, well,
really,
will it?
You sure?
It's just our perspective on it, and when we're not here, that perspective won't be there. I'm sure dinosaurs were wandering around thinking, "Oh my God, we're amazing!
Look at that pterodactyl! Look at it fly!" Yeah, I love that. I really like that way in which you've drawn a line from it's a very steep line, and if that's the right way to describe it, but from being the agency of being with a inanimate loaf of bread, or an animate loaf of bread, that it's certainly changing in time, at the very least, and the possibility of taking pleasure of being with that thing and creating and working that material, to a particular kind of brazen attitude to the world around us, and the scale of that attitude. I love that profundity of that thread, that line.
I think the line is potentially lovely, but I think the hubris behind, and because I'm catching myself in thinking about it, and I do know that I'm able to say, fuck it, just let it all burn. Not in a sense that I think we should use all the planet's resources, but because I don't have children. I don't have a concern about lineage or legacy in the same way. So I feel like I'm divorced from that conversation, and perhaps it allows me to go, humanity is just a moment. And it's okay if that moment stops.
But that's true whether you have children or not.
It is true, but I think that people who have children probably cling to the idea that how dare you be so profligate. Although weirdly, they're the ones being profligate with resources, because one might argue having children is a deeply damaging thing to do.
Well, it's not even an argument, really.
Well, no. Well, yeah, I know, but it's a difficult thing to say.
Which is very easy for you and I to say.
Well, yeah, it is. It is really easy for us to say, but I mean, it's something that, it's something that I bump up against a lot. The entitlement of people who have bred. I'm cutting this out, but
I just want to do a dad joke, which is, people have bread and I've got bread.
Yeah, but what you've bred is more delicious than what they have.
Holy Miller, you are
I know.
appalling.
I don't mean
you will Bruce Springsteen the fuck out of that line, won't you?
Yeah, I will. I probably will Bruce Springsteen the fuck out of quite a lot of this bit here, because it's kind of like...
Yeah, people don't like to hear it.
No, people don't like to hear that.
Yeah.
That I remember being... schooled isn't quite the right word.
I think I remember the story, actually, but I would like to hear it again just to make sure it is the same story.
It is probably the same story, which was that somebody with multiple children offered a critique to me of the fact that I was travelling on an aeroplane. And I humbly suggested that...
Did you humbly suggest it?
I humbly suggested that had he had a vasectomy at 18 and lived more lightly on the planet than he did, I might be able to accept his critique of my lifestyle. But as it was, he could fuck right off unless he was prepared to sacrifice one of them in a volcano.
A volcano.
Well, it seems like an appropriate way to dispose of children. You might as well appease the volcano gods. But
I'm not
yeah,
sure
so
we should. This is the incinerating children episode. We're challenging our listeners right here, right now.
we are, and I am. I mean, obviously, it's that weird place where I'm talking about stuff in the abstract, because I have children in my life who I probably would throw myself into a volcano to prevent them being in one.
Same here.
And I don't need to have made them.
Yeah.
To feel,
You would trade yourself to save them.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Unconditionally.
But I suspect I'd do that also for the dog. So I mean, I'm not. I
This
don't
is the
think
low bar of your ability to sacrifice yourself.
Isn't that interesting? I don't know if it is a low bar or if it tells you how much I think about those children.
I was thinking, go on.
No. It's because I actually care quite deeply about my dog. And I'm increasingly, as I get older, stopping feeling like I need to be apologetic about that.
Oh.
But
you've felt that before.
Being apologetic?
About about loving your dog.
Well, like when a dog dies and when you go into a process of mourning, it's like, well, it's not a person. It's like, no, I've spent much more time with this creature than I have with any other person. It's a fuck's sight more important in this moment. I know it's not in the grand scheme of things, but then we're back to this idea of
Sentience.
According to whom? Exactly.
Agency.
According to the principles of the anthropocentric worldview that says we are the crown of creation.
Yeah.
To quote a piece by Rimini Protocol.
Who does really get to decide that stuff? That's it's a little bit touching on. We spoke about it was the episode about fandom. And who am I to say that you or someone shouldn't follow that football team and spend your entire life savings following them around? Really? I mean, there's part of me that goes, "Come on, really?" But I cannot. I'm in no position to. My values, the things I care about, my loaves of bread, they have no more value.
Absolutely. The things that we waste our resources on.
Finding pleasure.
Exactly that. And that they are, those people who are following those football teams, those people who are going to the comic conventions, they are living in joy.
Oh, but I thought a portmanteau was something like when you took two words
and squashed them together.
Yes.
Yeah, but we've got words in common usage that were squashed together ages ago.
Oh, sure.
And you're going to ask me for an example, and I can't think of one. But they wouldn't be new anymore. So
bankrupt is one I heard just the other day. Lil was telling me about it.
Oh, we're going to have to hit pause. Tell me about bankrupt.
It actually comes from Italian, and
does it?
And I'm going to get it a little bit wrong because that's my style. But banca, it means bank, but also it came from the word bench, and rotto is broken. And it used to be that there were money lenders in squares, and they would effectively sit behind a bench, and if you came and took your, borrowed some money from them. That's how that was done, via these banca, or I'm not sure what the plural would be, but anyway. And if there was some kind of problem with that particular, call it a business, but person, the people that ran the local community would come and literally break that bench. And so bancarotta, I guess in this case, broken bank, and it's became bankrupt.
Huh!
Cool, huh?
Wow, that's
from a
cool.
podcast. It's from a podcast called Kangaroo English, and I will definitely put, if this makes the cut, or
this is making the cut.
Then,
I'm not sure if anything on either side will, but this will.
Then and you don't Bruce Springsteen the hell out of it, then I will put a link to that particular episode in the show notes. Cool,
Lovely.